Let me take a quick check. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Right in the chat. Okay, okay, all right. Now, whenever participants can write in the chat window whenever they wish to contribute or ask a question, we'll have to live with some glitches in technology because it is still evolving. We might have at one point of time over 500 people here. So hopefully we should last this 1.5 hours without any hiccups. Once again, good afternoon. This is your host and moderator for the event, Dr. Kamal Kishore Sharma. I currently serve the Adani Institute of Infrastructure Management as a practice professor and head of the Center of Surface and Air Transport, which is a center of excellence here. Earlier, I have served as an officer in the Indian Civil Services, a CEO at a multinational company, and a vice chancellor at an Indian university. Today, we are here to talk about airlines and airports business, specifically in the post-COVID-19 era, the new normal that we all are expecting to see. Aviation in India, including both the military and civil aviation, is the fastest growing aviation market in the world, according to International Air Transport Association itself. There are 26 airline companies that operate in India, flying in the domestic and international circuits. They include Air India, Indigo, SpiceJet, etc. We have about 464 airports and airstrips. And we have recently seen the government push to professionalize the airport management with private participation. The sector contributes about $72 billion to GDP. To warm up, let me put a question now to get a feel of how many of you would find this hard to believe about Indian aviation business. Ritesh, can we have the poll question, please? The question goes like this. Did you know India would be flying 25% share of all airline passengers globally by 2025? You could quickly give a response over here. You got 30 seconds to respond. All right, there you go. Remaining time 0. And Ritesh, can we have the results? All right. So quite a lot of you actually knew about it, but I am quite intrigued and with the answers of no, and they have been very honest that a lot of us are not so bullish about what Indian aviation could be like in the years to come. Now, given the background that we are amidst the worst pandemic of all times, COVID-19, that has affected millions of people across the globe and resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths and disruption of economies and supply chain. Aviation business was bound to be hit given the nature of the spread of the disease. Things are serious even now, but there is hope all around. The airlines are now being allowed to fly, albeit with some restrictions. Another question coming your way. Let me have a feel of, do you think air travel is safe in the COVID-19 environment. You could look at comparative travel modes like railways or personal vehicles, but do you think air travel is safe in the COVID-19 environment? Ritesh, can we have this question poll, please? All right, your time starts now. The silence could be deafening. That's what we are going through at the moment. All right, the time is up. Ritesh, can we have the result? Wow. So 95 out of about 300. So a third of you say yes, air travel is safe. And the other 2/3 are either neutral or no, or they have not answered. Uh, you could, there could be multiple ways in which you could look at this answer. One is probably how many of us regularly or very frequently travel, and how many of us actually know about what is happening at the airports and the airlines, and what are the kind of precautions that they are taking to make the travel safe. So we will leave that for some other day. But it's my pleasure today to have with me three stars in their own reign, speakers of the day, starting with Professor Dr. Wouter de Wolf. He's a professor at University of Antwerp, Center for Excellence on Maritime and Air Transport. We'll have a detailed introduction in a minute. The next speaker we have is Mr. Bernard Zandi. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Indian multinational Adani Enterprises Airports Business. And then we have Dr. Vasudevan S. from KPMG, the global consulting company, and he heads the global airports portfolio. Such is the galaxy of the speakers. I'm really excited to hear to their views, and we all are. So let me take this opportunity to introduce you to the first speaker of the day, Dr. Wouter de Wolf. He's a master's in applied economics, business engineering masters, MBA from Leuven, and then PhD in applied economics at University of Antwerp. And his thesis was on air transport cargo business strategies. He has had earlier professional experience of working with British Airways, Sabena Technics, Van Gansingwinkel in Belgium, France, and Luxembourg. He is currently the academic director of Center for Maritime and Air Transport and a professor at the University of Antwerp. His research and training interests lie in air transport strategy, economics and business, advanced managerial economics, e-commerce, and urban logistics. He's also a visiting professor to Chongqing University in China, University of Hasselt at Belgium, and at an Indonesian university. And we are glad to have him aboard as a partner with the Adani Institute of Infrastructure Management. Welcome, Dr. Wouter de Wolf. You are speaking from thousands of kilometers away. If you look at just the aerial distance, but I am sure technology is going to help us in listening to your views. I look forward to. Welcome, Wutadil. The stage is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kamal, dear colleague and friend. Dear audience, first of all, thank you very much for having me on board. India is one of my favorite countries, and I'm a big fan of air transport, and India definitely will be, as Dr. Kamal said, will be the place to be the next decade. The next 17, 18 minutes, Dr. Kamal asked me to set a bit the scene about airlines and airport business, talking about India, about Asia, and about what's really going on post-COVID-19. If I can have the next slide, then you can see what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the Indian air transport, then the impact of COVID-19 on the world. We try to focus then on what's happening with India, try to summarize the winners and the losers of the government intervention, then the new normal. I know what the next speakers also talk about that. I try to be Madame Soleil. In France, Madame Soleil is the woman who can predict the future. And then going to talk about challenges for airports, which my colleague and friend will further talk to the next. So I hear quite a lot of background noise, so I think someone probably didn't switch off their because there's lots of background noise. So if people can maybe mute the microphone, that would help. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? So what's happening with the Indian? How is Indian perceived? India perceived in the outside world about when you look at air transport, if you look pre-COVID, and then you really think about four features which immediately struck your mind. A little bit contrary to United States and China, I mean, the low-cost carrier is really by far the most dominant business model. If you look at the airlines, which are doing well in India, they are mainly low-cost carriers, and they have a huge market share, especially if you compare it with the United States and the Chinese or the Asian market. The second feature is that Indian Airlines so far have a tradition of shaky financial performance. There are a few exceptions there, but if you look at the bankruptcies and the state's owned carrier Air India, what's going on there from the outside world, we really see it as a difficult market to operate in because it's very difficult to make money. On the other side, we see it's a huge growth industry in India. We had the same growth in China about 5 to 10 years ago. In Europe, the same. In the US 20 years ago. You see this double-digit growth pre-COVID, and it looks like it will be one of the fastest growing aviation markets in the world. Given the fact that India is also a high population country, you can see that this will really explode from the 650 aircraft only that India has now. It will treble or quadruple in the next 10 to 15 years. On the other side, we see it also as a high impact industry. Lots of jobs directly and indirectly are linked to that. And you can also see that the government increasingly sees aviation as one of the let's say interesting businesses. That's how we look at it from the outside world. If you can show me the next slide. Then, of course, then COVID-19 is suddenly happening from the end of February. It really moves from China to Europe, and from Europe to the United States. It's for the moment very active in Asia around China. In Europe, it is a bit getting stabilized for the moment. The impact is that almost all air traffic for passengers really plummeted. You can see there in April, for instance, we had about 90% less passenger traffic, and even some areas 95 or maybe up to 100%. There was hardly any traffic apart from some repatriation flights. So air travel almost stopped in the world. And the next slide, you can see that also the same things happened in the world everywhere. The only place where it still is getting back, although significantly less than the pre-COVID levels, is China. China domestic is gearing up. You see the same thing in Europe. Half of June and beginning of July, most of the carriers start flying again inside Europe and also outside Europe. So you see, we're catching up again. I saw the schedules of Lufthansa for September, and it looks like from September onwards, they will already fly to 80% of the destinations that they were flying before, although with significantly less frequency. So you see a huge cut in air travel supply and also in air travel demand, apart from the China domestic market that's slowly recovering, but still 60 to 70% below the pre-COVID-19 levels. Can I have the next slide, please? Here you can see domestic, some countries that are doing quite well for the moment as far as COVID-19 is concerned. You see China, Vietnam, South Korea, and New Zealand there. It is catching up, but still between 20 and 50% below the pre-COVID level. So domestically, things are catching up. As I just said, in Europe, it looks like in July, domestically, if you see Europe as one country, you will see there we will probably also have about 50% of the previous capacity and demand. Next slide, please. So the impact has been very severe if you look at the passengers market. If you look on the next slide, can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. If you look at India now, some things I noticed and what's perceived in the market. I like this graph, and it looks on the internet who's looking for to book airline tickets, and you can see in India it almost came to the complete standstill. A number of forecasts are happening. I did some research, or at least one of my colleagues, Ahmed Wasim, he's probably listening now as well. He did some research for me. India has been a low yield market. If you see what's happening now in China and in Europe, there you can see that yields are even going down further. So people are predicting that the yields will go down the next couple of months. The demand looks like halving over the moment it catches up. And it looks like the year 2020 will be an absolute disaster for all airlines around the world, but also for Indian Airlines. And if you look in the United States, in Europe, in China, these airlines can only survive thanks to government support, equity support, or loans or guarantees, all of that. Without that, most of them would have gone bankrupt. And we predict if the government doesn't support many airlines, they will go bankrupt. And it's something that an economist doesn't like to say, that the government has to intervene, but the government really had to intervene with cash in a number of continents and countries. And we see that India, for the moment, is somewhat hesitant. So Air India was already almost bankrupt. So that doesn't look good. And a few other ailing airlines will probably become into trouble the next couple of months. Can I have the next slide? Freight is somewhat different. All these personal protection material has to be flown in from China, from Turkey, from other countries. So there you can see that freight really tumbled significantly, but it is catching up. And these figures are from last week, from Mumbai and Delhi. And there you can see that the market for freight at least is recovering, although still far below the pre-COVID-19 levels. Can I have the next slide, please? So if you look at the winners and the losers, in Europe and in the US, it's quite clear who are the winners and the losers. If you look in Asia, there's somewhat a different picture. You can see that the low-cost carriers, which were doing well before the COVID-19 crisis, they come back out of this crisis reinforced. So airlines like AirAsia, Indigo Air in India, and Lion Air in Indonesia, they will really come out reinforced. They have a low-cost base. They are focusing on point-to-point traffic. It's easy for them to build up the traffic, and they have a very good online coverage to attract passengers. They really use the price elasticity, which is very negative for leisure travel. As you know, it's minus 1.5. This means if you decrease the price with 50%, your demand doubles in a way. And they play that game very well. They've done it very well in the past. And it looks like they can really use all their assets and their knowledge to come back reinforced. Also, some big airlines are for the moment cutting capacity. This means some valuable slots are becoming available at some important airports which were slot constrained. So they're very eager to take up these available slots. So if you look in Europe, Ryanair, EasyJet will come out as winner, and no doubtly these three low-cost carriers. There are also a few in Japan and South Korea, but these three low-cost carriers in India and around India will definitely come back. Then you see that the Chinese two big airlines, China Eastern, China Southern, they're of course kind of government airlines. They've been propped up with money, and they will also come out as one of the winners. Singapore Airlines, they already had a very good strategy in Singapore Airlines, as big backing from the government, and they won't let it go because it's one of the prime sectors there. And before the COVID-19 crisis, all the airlines which you see there on top did actually very well. If you look at the losers, these will probably be mainly the smaller state-owned airlines and the airlines which were not profitable before. Maybe they get some money now, but if their cost base is not right, if their business model is not right, they can probably survive somewhat longer. I have serious doubts with all these airlines which there you see in the losers. Unfortunately, I have to put Air India. Air India is the Alitalia from Europe. It's a government airline that hardly made any profit in the past, which doesn't have any good cost base. So if the government gives Air India somewhat money, they will probably survive another year or two. But after that, they will probably end up in the bankruptcy. The same with other airlines like Korean Air, Garuda Indonesia, Malaysia, Thai Airlines, airlines who were very limited in profit, and which cost model is too high. This might be just the crisis too much for them, but we will see that in the next coming years. So if the government intervenes, some airlines come out reinforced, like the ones on the top. Some airlines can just keep their operations in the air for a while because the government deems it necessary for connectivity reasons or for other reasons. But in the long term, these airlines have very, very limited future. Also, if they have a very strong low-cost carrier, like Garuda has Lion Air, for instance, Korean Air has probably about 7 low-cost carriers fighting. Malaysia has Air Asia fighting very hard, and Air India has Indigo, who is extremely efficient in India. So this is the picture of the winners and the losers somewhat. Can I have the next slide, please? Dr. Kamal, I'm trying to stick into my time. If you look at what will be the new normal air travel experience, the other speaker will probably talk us all a bit about it. You can see it here on these blocks, but some things I would like to speak to you. Of course, there will be temperature checks and masks and all of that. But if you look, once the airlines are back to their normal capacity, you will see that all the terminals are far too small, and the airports really have to rethink the design of their airports to get these operations going. Even if you have to do queue management and have to keep still social distance, that will be very challenging in the current layout of airports. If you're in many Asian airports, it's very, very, very crowded there. And one of the things, for instance, which might change is that you will probably see separation between the luggage and the passengers. If you see at the check-in, these are most of the time the most crowded areas at the airport. And there, if you have to keep social distance there, it's very difficult. In Europe, there are some tests of companies who are picking up their luggage from the people's home and check it in on their behalf. We see that in the future there will be more and more separation between the luggage, which might be picked up from your home or from your hotel or from another check-in area in the city, and after that being transported. Really a segregation between the passengers flow and the luggage flow. This is one of the things which you will probably see. You also see more automated processes, which is already happening. I was recently, a couple of months ago, in the United States, and if you see there how the whole process is, you hardly touch anything. Everything is virtual, iris scan, and all of that. Boarding cards, there's hardly any personal touch on that. So that will probably also increase significantly. And a few other ones which the next speaker will probably talk more about it. Can I have the next slide, please? It's always difficult to predict the future. But Dr. Kamal was asking me, can you have my view on the future? And I'm fairly confident that although there's a big hiccup for the moment, which will probably last 18 months in Europe and the US, probably a bit longer, in Asia a bit shorter, we will come back to the previous pre-COVID-19 levels in probably 18 months. Everything depends, of course, on a vaccine or not and how things are going. And after that, India will, according to my point of view, remain on the very fast growth path, which has been forecasted over the next 10, 15, 20 years. So you will see the traffic will treble in 20 years, up to 500 million passenger journeys. I don't have to tell you, but India gets an increasingly richer middle class who likes to travel. You will see that the trains in India are very convenient, but the geography is that way that flights are easily, especially if it's low-cost flights, substituted from a rail journey. And all the predictions say the same thing, that in 10 years, you will see that there's a mistake there in the slide. In 10 years' time, India will overtake Germany, Japan, Spain, and the UK to become the largest aviation market after the US, China, and India. If you consider Europe as one continent, India will be number 4. If you see Europe as separate countries, India will be number 3. So that China, in the third bullet, you have to change it to India. Sorry about that. And how will it look like? It looks like the domestic and the mid-range, this is flights up to 3.5 hours, will be dominated by the current low-cost carriers. Maybe there will be some new entrants, because Asia is one of the new entrants. But India is such a promising market that I'm quite sure you will have some new entrants coming up. But the low cost is the business model that is very suitable for the domestic and for the mid-range market. The long-range market, the international market, there you see the cards have been played. India is a bit the playground. If you look at it from the Middle Eastern carriers, if you look at Qatar, Emirates, Etihad, they have a huge exposure there in the Indian market. It looks like the momentum is gone, also due to the government regulations, which are quite difficult for Indian airlines to fly internationally to protect Air India. But you will see that to fly long haul, I think that market is now very difficult, and it's probably too late now for India to enter that market. China was just in time. I think the Indian market will really struggle to gain market share if you look at the long-range international market. So probably foreign carriers, mainly Middle Eastern, but also some other carriers might dominate that in the future. And in my last slide, if you move to the next slide, please, and then I stick nicely in time. What are the challenges for these airports? Queue management will be a very, very big issue over the next couple of years. It's not COVID-19. In a few years, maybe we have another pandemic coming up. Capacity management was already an issue at many airports, especially in Asia. If you see the moment traffic is picking up, you will see that many airports don't have the capacity. On the short term, some things could be done by some space management, by doing some improvements on the check-in procedures, as I just said, by disentangling the luggage from the passenger flows, and gate management, as you always have big queues at check-in, you always have big queues at boarding as well. So there, some creativity has to have to be done to keep the social distancing. Anyway, that's basically my introduction of setting the scene. And normally my friend Ben from Natani Airports, the CEO there, will talk more about the challenges of the airport. So thank you very much, and I'm sure we still have some questions after that, Dr. Kamal.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Wouter. That was an excellent proposition of how the world airlines business, how governments are looking at it, what kind of supports are coming in, how airlines are responding to that, and how at the end of it, you nicely ended up with that airlines and airports are too dependent on each other, and these two are businesses that will feed on each other. We have the next speaker, Mr. Bernard Zandi, who will give us a view of the view of what are the real problems and challenges at airports, because he is now going to lead the next revolution in India on private participation in airport management. To introduce Mr. Behnard, he's popularly called Ben here. So Ben is a very seasoned industry professional, is the driving force behind many business turnarounds, mergers and acquisitions, commercial expansion, industry reinvention and all. He has keen and active interest by reimagining the airport travel with pioneering technologies, retail concept, and new levels of satisfaction, customer satisfaction and experience. He is currently CEO of Adani Airports Business at Adani Enterprises Limited, and will be overlooking the first portion of the privatization and development of international airports at Ahmedabad, Lucknow, and Bangalore. And as the new airports come in the next round of bidding, only future can tell how large will be his canvas. Prior to being here with Adani Airports, he was president and CEO of Fraport USA, the North American division of Fraport Group. He was executive vice president of operations for a private equity firm, Bunker Hill Capital. He was a principal and president of his own management firm, where he leveraged a broad background in hospitality design, developments and operations and airport concessions. He's a certified Six Sigma black belt professional, and I loved this. He's also served as a city councilman and vice mayor of Bristol, Tennessee in cities, and had been the president of multiple non-profit organizations. What a complete profile. Ben, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much for a wonderful introduction. Thank you, Dr. Wutter, for your wonderful presentation. It is an honor to be sitting with you as a speaker here today, and others that are participating. And thank the audience for participating in this session. Aviation industry disturbances has happened since the 80s all the way through, but we'll get into detail of it. But specifically, airlines and airports, how are they going to behave, and how their partnership is going to go forward post-COVID-19 is the new norm. So the new world order has challenged all the industries, including aviation, airport, and airlines. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. So the interactions and the dynamics of airport and airline in the past, pre-COVID-19, was pretty much formed by three agents: the airport operator, the Ministry of the Airport owner, airlines, and the passengers. This was a double-sided market, which means the airline and the passengers both dictated the strategies, they dictated initiatives and services that both have to agree to keep up with the demand and the population. And both of these influences are really capital intensive. Running an airline is very capital intensive, as well as running an airport is very capital intensive due to capacity, due to aircraft leases or acquisitions. So sustaining the transport air infrastructure, it really relies and depends on these two entities, the airlines and the airports. So that dynamic and that challenge pre-COVID was complex. And today, that is going to be even more complex. But I think both parties are challenged to be creative, to be collaborative, and to be able to work together to save this wonderful, wonderful air transport structure. Some of the airports, metro versus non-metro, had a different negotiating tokens pre-COVID due to the fact that the airlines really was the key holder on the route development destinations, whether regional, national, or international. Airlines in US specifically mostly subsidized the shortfall of expenses, and they locked their slots and they created a hub for themselves and they secure their position in that specific geography. And therefore, they created a barrier to entry of other airlines coming in and being able to penetrate the market. The economy, business class, and the first class passengers and their profile was a property of the airlines. They did not share that pre-COVID to the airport operators or anyone else in the industry. And that classified information really is valuable to be able to monetize the aeronautical, non-aeronautical, commercial side of our air transfer structure. Airport-airline relationship connection terms drove the success of the airport, depending on how much financially the airlines participated in the subsidy of the expenses. The aeronautical and non-aeronautical initiatives also drove the success of the airport to be able to penetrate and maximize revenue. Now let's go to post-COVID. Next slide, please. Post-COVID. So again, the business model has not changed. The three agents still are in business together, except this is now a triple-sided market, which means through the recovery program, we're going to have to honor, manage, and live with the biological threat, as we have done since 9/11 with terrorism threat, and specifically with the airborne disease. The challenges are much higher and much more complex. So that aspect of the biological threat management, airline relationship, and the passengers, these three dimensions really have to bring collaboration and synergy among all of us in the industry. Of course, the biological threat is capital intensive, a lot of technologies, a lot of automation, a lot of digitalization. Having said that, that creates also a high level of cybersecurity to protect yourself from cyber attacks. And also during the recovery program, we have to see the policy interventions of green zone cities versus non-green zone cities. How are we going to develop this route development with airlines? Which cities are allowed to travel to which cities? What are the load factors? And how are we going to manage this social distancing with the airlines and the load factor? So therefore, I think this will really enforce the airlines to have an open mind and talk to the airport operators and come to the table and together imagine a new revenue stream. How to mitigate this new expenses of biological threat, both for the airlines and the airports, and how to mitigate this reduction in load factor and not being able to travel to red cities and yellow zone cities and all of that. So this unconventional revenue stream is going to be at the top of everyone's initiative. First, we got to make sure that we are providing a safe environment. We have to take advantage of this global gap, and we have to put human first, and we have to figure out how to move the industry forward, how we can be authentic, and how we can mitigate this biological threat, as well as post-vaccine and post-cure of COVID-19. How else can we also have a business continuity and a risk mitigation plan for any other biological threats that would come our way? So the aeronautical and non-aeronautical revenue in this complex environment is going to have to be the new world order in order to be able to honor all the challenges that are ahead of us. Next slide, please. As you look at the history of air travel disruption, the Gulf War in 1991 led to a 30% reduction in international air travel. 9/11, 2001 reduced air demand by 31%. The SARS pandemic in 2003, $6 billion revenue losses. The global recession in 2008 also challenged the industry by 13 billion. And as well as the disruption of the volcano in Iceland also impacted over 100,000 flights, and 48% of the traffic was impacted. and now COVID-19. But as you can see, pre-COVID-19, the air travel industry was booming, specifically in India, where we're almost growing at double digit, if not more. So the airline industry have survived at least 6 crises and disruptions thus far, and I believe strongly that with this global pause, we will become creative, innovative, and we will also survive the biological threat now and anyone in the future. Next. Next slide, please. There you go. So the challenges and the possible impact specifically to Indian airports. I foresee the glass is half full. I foresee the recovery period cannot be more than 24 months for Indian market. And I foresee India is poised to become the 3rd largest global aviation market by 2025. India is poised to have the world's largest number of travels by 2030. And the airline consolidation is expected, most certainly. The demographic shift, there's a chart below that will show to you later. By 2025, India's 75% of 1.3 billion population is going to be middle class and higher, which means the first-time travelers, the first-time spenders, they want to explode their country, they want to explode the world. That's going to create a tremendous demand on the aviation infrastructure in India. And obviously, as of today, the infrastructure will struggle to meet the demand of 2025. So therefore, you're going to see quite a few of private-public partnership activities in India. The financial ministry has already announced 12 airports for PPP and more to come. You're going to see a lot of greenfield airports that is going to emerge also through PPP. So we have to work so diligent for the next 5 years to be ready for this generation shift, for this population growth, as well as the demand of our industry. So the recovery period is going to be the pain period for us, but let that not stop us from what's at the horizon in the future, and let's capture the future, and let's expedite the 22nd century artificial intelligence, technology, IT, digitalization to India. India deserves it. They're going to be the 3rd in the world in travelers, and they're going to be the 3rd largest aviation market globally. So we deserve to be first, and that's part of our vision at Adani to bring that to the market. As of today, pre-COVID, 90% of our domestic routes were single-aisle aircrafts. Therefore, we believe the recovery period is going to be faster for us due to the fact that it is much more cost efficient for domestic travelers to travel and domestic airlines to manage their costs and expenses. Again, as I said, recovery is 24 months. I don't know if the chart is available to share, but if it is, I will go to the next slide. There you go. So as you can see, the South Asian middle class from 2010 to 2025, India, number 2 on the list, that we're going to go from 3% of the population being middle class in 2010 to 71% of the population in 2025. A tremendous congratulations to the Indian government, their vision, their foresight, their investment in the country. And that's why Adani is really, really committed to investment in infrastructure. They've done it for many years. And that's why they picked the aviation to also help the nation building initiative and grow with goodness to bring the aviation to 22nd century by 2025. Next slide. Are there opportunities? Well, absolutely. There is, in my view, there is a short transformation approach and a short transformation strategy, which is going to expedite the recovery program between now and post-COVID vaccination and cure. And there is also a long-term transformation strategy which is going to get India aviation industry and the market ready for 2025 for this savvy generation shift and population growth, and put us on the third globally in the aviation market. So I see Adani airports to be fully contactless airports by 2025. I see them to be one of the smartest airports in the world, from artificial intelligence, technology, IT, cybersecurity. And I see the way we handle in the future, post-COVID, infected passengers in a much more appropriate manner and much more foresight in advance of them reaching the airports. The business continuity plan we're working on is going to mandate business continuity for airlines, us, during any biological threat. Global solution versus competition. Pre-COVID, in a red ocean, it was a competitive world. So therefore, a party lost and a party won when there was a greenfield airport. When there was auctions for 6 airports, somebody lost and somebody won. So that was a competitive world. But today, I believe the entire aviation market is working on a solution to save the industry, to save the air travel infrastructure, and to come up with a business continuity post-COVID with any kind of biological threat or any other disruption. Obviously, we cannot make it 100% bulletproof. What we can do better than what we had to face when we didn't have the tools to face COVID-19. So innovation is going to be extremely authentic. Synergy among the industries, synergy among the competitors, synergy among the government and the private entities. All of these initiatives is going to put human first. And also environmental issues, pollutions, and taking care of our planet Earth is also going to be the second initiative right after putting human first. So we have to expedite the future, and we will. And I'm so confident that this synergy, creating solutions, is going to move at the speed of light. New revenue model is on the horizon. If you look at the history of last 10 to 15 years, our millennial generation, the Y, the X, the Z generation, they all have been trained. They went from no computer to computer, from computer to private devices, from private devices to apps, from apps and private devices to a 5G technology, biometric facial recognition, biometric finger recognition, as well as audio recognition. So therefore, they are moving us to the future faster than we want to. And this 5G and camera and audio, facial recognition and voice recognition is going to obsolete private devices and is going to bring a digital marketplace that is much more vast and much more profound and much more opportunistic than Amazon, eBay, Walmart, e-commerce, any other activities that we see today. Next. Long-term transformation, we talked about technology, we talked about automation, digitalization. I can see a digital terminal, a digital downtown through a 5G video and audio activation. I can see us stepping outside of our doors and saying just to the thin air, Uber, and the Uber will show up, recognize you, get you in the car. Digital walletless activity will take place. You will get to your destination. I can see a walletless environment by 2025 and a centralized control room in our airports that I can manage our 6 airports today, and I can manage more to come. As I said, the higher quality of cyber security is more important for us now that we're moving to a virtual reality and a digital world very fast. So less human contact will push us to have self-driving cars, and I can see us by 2025 having electronic planes flying long distances, technical and operational resisting this change with technology, with digitalization, and mitigating any future crisis in advance and pre and post. This generation shift has challenged us to think outside the box. And we are looking at a digital marketplace, a digital terminal, digital downtown that have a highest rate of conversion for this new generation by 2025. So as an example, our goal is if today 12 million people travel through Ahmedabad and only 30% of that population are users, my goal is once our model is up and running, that the user ratio becomes 70% and the non-user becomes 30%. We had a really good discussion with Airbus yesterday about airspace management, optimizing that, maximizing that, redesigning that. So that's also on our scope of work. Next slide, please. So you asked me, all of these future talks, what does it mean? What is it going to be look like? And what is the structure of the technologies and activities? And what does the smart planes and the smart airport means like? So for us, passenger experience will be the most important aspect for our airports. And our obsession is going to be around customer service, like no one else in the industry. The new modern passengers' expectations getting even higher than what was pre-COVID. This savvy generation that is shifting to be the dominant consumer generation in 2025 are extremely savvy, they're extremely digitalized, they love the virtual reality world, and they're on their phone on average 4 hours a day, minimum. So the facial recognition, the technology is going to enable us to have a smart pass that you already checked in before you even step out of your house. And when you get to our airport, you are recognized. When you get to our self-driving cars, you are recognized and proved. Your baggage is in the trunk of the self-driving cars. The trunk will x-ray your baggage. If there are any items that needs to be removed, you are asked to remove before the baggage is removed. The home baggage drop-off courier service will give you such a convenience experience that you don't even have to worry about lifting a finger before you leave the couch of your home. And the deployment of artificial intelligence and robots in our passenger terminal will even make your experiences much more futuristic. Next. Next slide, please. There you go. So pointers for support required from government and ecosystem. Most certainly, the industry aviation is the most regulated industry in my eyes. So therefore, any kind of change that you propose, any kind of policy changes, any kind of policy interventions that is going to change the industry with the airlines as well as with the municipalities is going to have to require quite a bit of convincing and a business case. Is going to have to require quite a bit of work in advance to make sure all risks are mitigated, all questions are answered appropriately. And that is our intention to do with the Indian government. We are one of the most regulated countries in the world. And I find, I worked in the US for 40 years, and this is my first time being in India. And I find it's such a wonderful, wonderful experience due to the fact you find the country and the government extremely disciplined and organized with regulations and policies and policy revisions. But at the same time, it is such an informal business meetings and get-togethers and open for ideas and open for creativity and open for bringing the future and expediting the future. And that's why I feel that India is poised to be one of the strongest players in the market. Having said that, as I said in the past, the glass is half full. And how do I see it? The positive change comes from all of us together addressing the climate change emergency with this global pulse. We need to think outside the box. We also need to digitalize faster than ever before because the generation ahead of us are ahead of us. We need to accelerate, we need to expedite the beneficial capital investment to realize productivity gains. So we need to identify where the capital is needed, where the CapEx is needed, when are you going to make the investment, and when do you need to expedite the investment to impact the industry the way you want to. Opportunities to stimulate the new business model. As I said, the digital downtown, we are imagining to bring all the players downtown into our digital world and have them have access to all of our passengers, departing or arriving. And they can order from this digital downtown and have it delivered to their home, have it delivered to the plane, have it delivered to the terminal, or wherever they like. Increasing collaboration, it is on the horizon among all of us. Even though we compete for the market, our number one duty is to our citizens, and our second duty is to our industry. We have to make sure they both are protected, and the future is expedited. Thank you.
You perfectly placed the priorities in front of airports in what the future of airports would be for the customers as the business side, demand side grows to unforeseen levels. And so the models will have to be different. Technology will have to play a big role. But given in these conditions these days, the impact of COVID is so immense that some of the airlines, and hence, if the airlines business does not pick up, the airports would see the brunt of difficult periods. So there's a question. Let me have it from the audience. What do they feel about? Ritesh, can we have that question, please? My statement is government should support private airlines heavily impacted by COVID-19. Given that in India, most of the airlines are in the private domain except Air India and Indian Airlines, should, given the difficult conditions because of COVID-19, should the governments be supporting private airlines? Just have an opinion survey from everybody. Your time already started, so I think you can make your choice. Time up, and let us have the results. So the government should support the private airlines, private sector airlines. Moderately agree, 75 out of 365. That's about 20%. Strongly agree, 114 out of 365. That's more than 30%. Indifferent, 17. Moderately disagree, 24, and 11. That's a smaller number, but I guess they are of the opinion that probably the airlines should have looked at their own business models till date, and why should they be getting support from the exchequer, given that it was a pure play commercial business model. So different viewpoints, different ways to look at it. The passion of Ben, how would the future of airports and airlines would look like, is something that is controllable. What is not in control of people is the way technology would impact and way the policy side of it will play out. And here I would take this a great opportunity to introduce you to our third speaker of the day, Dr. S. Vasudevan. Dr. Vasudevan is an economist by training, and he holds a PhD in transport management from Indian Institute of Science, the best placed institution globally in terms of the best universities. He's the recipient of the prestigious Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Fellowship for Doctoral Studies, and he pursued his work as a research scholar from National University of Singapore. Currently, he's partner and head of the aviation practice of KPMG in India. He is also the global sector lead for KPMG's airport business and is an expert in advising governments, operation and aviation stakeholders on policy, strategy, finance, and transaction advisory services for PPP projects. Prior to this role, he spent about 18 years actively engaged in policy and regulatory matters in aviation in PPP sector. He advised Ministry of Civil Aviation, Government of India, on national airport strategy and national civil aviation policy, to count some of them. He has also supported the state governments in this regard. He's a member of US-India Aviation Cooperation Program and has worked extensively with the industrial clients in Northeast African countries, Thailand, Vietnam, Bhutan, Singapore on development strategy and policy reforms. He has led many transport clients projects like in Virgin Hyperloop One, Dani Group, Sidco, GMR Group, Mitsui, NHAI, NL. What a great exponent of anything and everything happening around airports, airlines, and who would be the best person to speak about the policy side of the business conditions today. Over to you, Dr. Vasudevan.
Thank you, Dr. Kamal, and pleasure to be on this panel with some esteemed colleagues, my good friend Bernhard Zandi and also Professor Guter. And thanks again to the Adani Institute of Infrastructure Management for having chosen me as one of the speakers for this panel. I know we're running short on time, but I just thought I'll pick on a few things that my prior speakers have spoken. I think they covered the entire gamut of what the aviation sector looks like globally and in India. And it's only a matter of time that I believe that things will come back to normal. Of course, we need to be patient to see how things pan out globally in terms of how the pandemic itself progresses, on whether we will be able to find a cure or eventually a vaccine which will prevent further outbreaks. But having said that, I'm an optimist for one, and I don't know, there are quite a few participants on this webinar. I see more than 365 odd people who are currently online. But of course, I can't have this question posed to you. I do want to give you the assurance that as far as I'm concerned, and I've seen the sector for long enough, and Ben has given you enough evidence of how we've come out of various crises in the past, whether it was 9/11 or the global financial crisis or other epidemics that have hit the world. This sector almost always has shown the resilience to come back and do better than before. And I think that's one thing that all of you need to keep in mind. Of course, the threat this time is very different in terms of what we're all confronting globally. It's about mortality, which has never been such a big issue in the past. Earlier events were all one-off events where we could plan about coming back to normalcy. In this particular case, the huge uncertainty around the morbidity and the mortality of hitherto unknown disease and how it will behave in the future is actually keeping us indoors forcibly in most cases. But as I say that, we're also seeing a progressive unlocking of economies, a progressive relaxation of rules across the world, because I think governments and people and society as a whole are coming to terms with the fact that life has to change. They have to learn to live with this virus, which essentially is going to be a new normal, at least for the next 12 to 24 months till we find a vaccine. And that today, as this famous Kubler-Ross model says, is something that we've learned to accept as a real threat and something that we need to live with without worrying too much about it, denying it, or feeling insecure about it. So I think the future looks good insofar as the airline business is concerned. I just thought I should focus on a couple of issues or interventions that the governments in India are looking at, both state and center. And I'll start off by taking you quickly through the agenda. Of course, there's a lot that we can discuss in the space of aviation, as you all know. And I know many of you have already responded to this invite on LinkedIn. Quite a few interesting questions which have already come as well, as I see in the chat box. We'll try and address all of them after I close my part of the presentation. So I just want to take you through 6 key themes. One is, what are we looking at in terms of restarting the engines? We've already done that in some form. Air India has led the way as the national carrier. We're also seeing operations by private carriers in India now. While it's not been very promising in terms of load factors, we do see more people coming into the airports in the next 1 or 2 months. It is going to be a rough road ahead. I also want to talk briefly about key decision makers who hold the key, in a sense, to actually make sure that this recovery is smooth and help to bring back the confidence in traveling once again. There are quite a few relief measures which the government has already announced, as many of you are aware. Many people believe that it's not enough, which is a fact. Some of them don't address the direct concern about travel, about how people can deal with exigencies when they land at different destinations, the support infrastructure, the health infrastructure availability, and all of that. So therefore, I want to talk a little bit about on what more needs to be done. And finally, I think a very quick peek, which I think Ben has covered beautifully in his presentation in terms of what we are looking at in the future on what the whole airline and airport business will look like. So can we move to the next slide, please?
Sorry.
I don't want to dwell on this.
Hello, Dr. Vasudevan. Extremely sorry to intervene, but you have captured it rightly that we've got a little less time because we want to have a few more questions as well.
Sure.
So I would appreciate if we could finish your portion, because quite a lot of it has been covered, as you rightly said. 10 minutes for you. All right, thank you.
Less than that, but I'll set the right context for the questions to come in, and thanks so much for that. So I don't want to dwell much on this slide, just to give you the confidence. And again, Ben and Professor Guter have mentioned it 2 or 3 times during their presentations. India is going to be the future aviation market of this region and possibly the world. As you know, the Ministry of Civil Aviation itself has got a vision to hit 1 billion odd trips by 2040. And we were well on our way to that, except for a bad year in 2019, which has now been further exacerbated by COVID in 2020. And we're going to see the after effects of that for a couple of years. But trust me, we're going to see growth come back. And I think the key inflection point, as I mentioned earlier, is the cure or the vaccine. And once that is found, you can bet your last dollar on the fact that this aviation market will come back on track, as many others, and we will lead the way into the future. Next slide, please. So there are basically 5 key stakeholders, as I see it, and there are many more, of course, who influence policy and who have a significant impact on the sector. But primarily, it's the Airports Authority of India, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, the regulator, the economic regulator, which is called AERA, the Director General of Civil Aviation, and also as the market stakeholders, banks, financial institutions, lessors, and investors, all of whom have a big stake in the performance of the sector and how airlines and airports deliver value to shareholders or stakeholders. Next slide, please. What have these agencies done? AI, as you know, as Professor Kamal mentioned earlier, we own about 460 odd airstrips and airports. That's quite a lot. Of course, only 100 odd are operational for the last few years. There are more in the pipeline. AI is obviously one of the principal anchors of developing airport infrastructure in the country. As you know, there is already a plan to develop or redevelop 100 new airports, including brownfield expansions, in order to support this whole push towards regional connectivity. So they are a key stakeholder and decision maker in this whole setup. So they have, in fact, taken some key steps to address the pain of airport operators, particularly the large ones in Delhi and Bombay, who pay a significant revenue share to AI as part of their top line. That was the big parameter on which these concessions were given out. So that's a major relief that AI has provided in giving a waiver on the revenue share that these two companies have been paying for a period of 3 months. The finance minister recently announced, of course, their intent to open up airspace, open up civilian airspace, which has always been a constraint in many cities in India because we do share it with the defense in most cases. So that's going to allow possibly better route management, shorter flight paths, and more efficiencies to come in the future. While it's more a strategic initiative, not something that is going to directly address the need for conserving cash in the sector, it is nevertheless something that should be applauded because the government is taking a long-term view on how they can open up the sector. The one other key change which the government has announced is the rationalization of the tax structure for MRO services. MRO, as you know, is a business with significant potential in India. Most large MRO companies in the world have done well because of the growth in fleets in different markets. India, without a doubt, is going to have more than 1,000 odd planes coming once we recover from this crisis. In fact, a lot of them are already in the order book, but the deliveries now will get deferred because of the impact that we've seen now. But all of it is going to come back in the next 4 or 5 years, as Ben mentioned. By 2025, you're going to see a completely new space in India. And therefore, it was important to encourage Indian companies and foreign investors wanting to leverage this opportunity in India to have a rationalized tax structure. This was hurting the industry for a very long time, so that's been reduced from 18 to 5. Will have significant impacts on the economics of airline and airport operations in the future. And again, DGCA being the technical regulator, so to speak, has realized that as airlines come back to business after having grounded their fleet and kept their crew and cockpit and cabin crew idle for so long, there is also a need to give them the time to get them recertified for flying again or for coming back to business. So that extension has been given as well, which is a logical thing to do. And of course, we've also read news about the fact that the government itself has provided relief to some of these concessionaires to invoke force majeure provisions under the contract with an extended 3-month period in order to avoid any payment obligations or debt service obligations, which will help them to conserve cash for a period of time. Now, all this is fine. Can you go to the next slide, please? All this is fine to see. As I said, they made a beginning, but I think more can be done. This is clearly not enough to give relief to at least airlines. Airports are a little better off because they always have the chance to recover some of these losses under the regulatory framework on a deferred basis with a carrying cost. And that's the relief that the Airports Economic Regulatory Authority of India provides. So they have a lot more certainty about when this cash will come back, unlike the airlines. But there are three or four key things that I thought should be the focus of future government relief measures as we look forward. One is clearly the need to find ways of improving passenger confidence to travel and also enhance safety. And I think some things have already been done by airports themselves, especially the private airports. AI is not far behind. They're also pursuing a few initiatives. Technology is going to be one key lever to ensure this. One, to give confidence to travelers coming to airports, to ensure safe passage through multiple infrastructure areas, both within the airport and outside the airport. There's a lot of coordination which is happening between airports, airlines, and transport service providers as well, including health agencies, as you would have seen. Some of you may have got a chance to travel, so you would have experienced these touch points and how they've changed or how they're changing for the better. The other is, of course, to give some cost cover for tariffs. This is more a regulatory issue, but somebody raised a question on the chat box saying, can fares be used as an incentive to encourage more travel? Certainly so. I think the airlines would do that for a short period of time to ensure some minimal load factors, but clearly that's not sustainable. That will change for the future, but certainly an element that could be seen in the next 2 or 3 months. The other is, of course, to provide waiver of discounts. And this is, again, a regulatory issue because the way ERA operates today is that once they determine the tariffs or the aeronautical yield per pax, if the airport decides to give a further discount on those tariffs to airlines, then they don't get the compensation necessary to beat their target revenues. And I think that's one area which ERA needs to deeply look at, because this is the time when airports should be given the flexibility to incentivize more traffic and give those discounts in the form of landing charges or parking charges or service fees. And they should not be penalized for doing that in the interest of promoting the market. So I think there is something that ERA can do in that space as well. Very quickly, on cost of operations, I've already covered some of these elements. One huge change that will come in terms of managing costs in the future is automation and technology. Ben mentioned about a few examples of what that future looks like. I will show you a few slides very shortly. Liquidity is another big area, and I think the RBI stepped in to provide that relief to the whole industry, including airlines and airports. That's something which is going to help some of these highly leveraged airport companies, as well as airlines which have borrowed. They should get that relief. My only request to the government was that they should be for a longer period of time. A 6-month window may not be enough for them to come out of the hole. So maybe that needs to be extended. Lastly, I think on policy and regulation, again, there are some strategic areas which the government can look at. On aircraft leasing, there's already been an announcement on this by the government that they are very keen to promote setting up an aircraft leasing business in India. I think it's high time we looked at that, given the fact that it does squeeze us out of a lot of forex, which can be saved, especially on the lessons that we've learned from COVID. There are other MRO reforms that need to come in place apart from just tax rationalization. That's something we will expect the government to announce. New PPP frameworks. Ben mentioned about the new airports that are in the pipeline. There are quite a few more which will come up for privatization, and of course, along with that, the land monetization option as well. Next slide, please. So this is again a summary of what I just mentioned. Our recommendation is that maybe the government should look at 2-3 other key areas in order to improve the sentiment and make sure that growth is back on track. One area which I think is very critical is to move to a new concession structure. I think the concession fee per pax as a big parameter has worked well. We've seen enough interest from foreign operators, and as many of you are aware who are on this call, on the webinar, Zurich is the first airport which has won the Geopolitical airport project on its own without an Indian partner. And that itself is quite telling in terms of the interest in the Indian market, especially for airport assets. I think the government could go one step further to see if future concessions, especially the ones which are on the block right now, the 6 airport concessions, can also be bid out on the basis of a predetermined tariff framework. This has been done successfully in other parts of the world, and I don't see a reason why it can't work in India with the kind of traffic potential that we're going to see. Again, the regulatory system as it stands now is quite strong. And I think that will make a significant difference in encouraging more foreign participation and more capital to come in India as well. I'll just pick on one other thing which I think will be important to push the growth momentum forward. Yeah, so I think one of the low-hanging fruits again in the interim period as we come through the recovery phase is the GST on economy and business class tickets. Today, there's a differential rate. We do know that it's 5% on economy class tickets and higher in business class is around 12%. But I think rationalizing that also may help in actually bringing in more passengers. Some of this may be redundant because some of these carriers, the market is mostly dominated by low cost. We only have Air India and Vistara as the full service carriers today. But it's possible that some of these benefits can also accrue to them for travelers who are willing to pay the premium, and therefore to incentivize them to get that tax rebate may actually be useful. Next slide, please. Sorry, if you can just go back to the previous slide. Just one other point, I think, which is very relevant for the times. I did mention about AI making that decision to defer the revenue share for these airports, but frankly, it's unproductive to do it at this point for the simple reason that all these airports are not making any revenue for the last 2 months, and neither will they in June as well. So I think the relief essentially needs to be extended to cover the obligation when they start returning to business as usual, which is when it'll have the maximum impact. The revenue share for zero revenue or zero income is going to be zero anyways. So I think the government needs to relook at that and see if they can provide a longer time cover on revenue share. Next slide, please. Again, I think there are specific initiatives that the government can take. Fuel hedging is an option that they can provide. In the past, I think the government has allowed airlines to import fuel directly, but did not give them the opportunity to distribute the fuel across different stations, which constrained their ability to take advantage of the fuel arbitrage that they could get. but that's something they could consider as a short-term measure as well. The other area where they could possibly provide more relief is to see if they can waive import duties on MRO components, which is a significant part of the input cost. That can actually create a level playing field for Indian third-party service providers vis-a-vis foreign service providers as well. Next slide, please. So this is my view on how the future may look for airports and airlines, the two key stakeholders in this business. I think the theme will be essentially around how designs will change in the future. I think Professor Wuta did refer to it on the need to provide more space at airports. That's looking at one possible outcome of this crisis. The other is to see how technology can actually do away with the need to have normal check-in areas itself, for example. And I think that's the direction that future airports will take. There are lessons that we've learned because of many events, including COVID. And I really think that with increasing digitization, contactless travel, the fact that baggage can be separated from passengers when they travel, all this means that the current spaces, the conventional area allocations that are being done for handling passengers for the check-in, security, immigration, and so on and so forth, can be drastically rationalized. And that's what I think will happen in the future. You'll see more efficient terminals with contactless travel, with people not having to wait at any given point. The whole immigration process can be digitized with digital documentation and background verification in real time. That's something that could easily happen in the next 4 or 5 years if the regulators put their mind to it. That actually means that it has huge impact on designs. The other area where I think you could see a significant change is travel options itself. We are still thinking conventionally about low cost and full service options. I think the market is already changing to see how we can provide more customized travel options for various travelers. And this is where I think the general aviation and business aviation fleet in markets like India could change the customer experience completely by having joint loyalty programs with airports. I don't want to go into the details, but I think this is a huge opportunity for airports and the GAB operators, as we call them, to come together to see if they can offer customized solutions for travel, especially for leisure destinations. And that's something which you'll see in the future. What it could also do is trigger a new market for aggregators, just like you have Ubers and Olas and Grabs for your city transport. I really think there's an opportunity to have an aggregator for air transport, and you could see that happen for both scheduled and non-scheduled services. Uh, can we go on to the next slide, please? So this is more about giving you a sense, and I think you will find this interesting, that this basically represents a typical travel journey for a user like you or me. You essentially start with the flight booking process, and then you get to the airport, you go through the terminal, do your statutory checks, which are required, check in your baggage, enter the gate, proceed to the waiting area, and then finally board the aircraft. Now, the future essentially will become digital in almost all these elements of the passenger journey process. Just to give you an example, your booking is anyways digital now. You could do that while traveling to the airport, do it prior, but it's going to be through some mobile or technology medium that you already are familiar with. Travel to the airport, Ben gave a classic example of how you could have a automated Uber driver or a smart car, which is programmed to pick you up at the time that you book the ticket, and all you have to say is yes or no. Once you get to the airport, you make sure that your bags are anyways tagged at home and taken separately to the check-in area. And you could have mechanisms to verify this remotely through your mobiles and other forms of technology, including beacons and RFIDs. So you don't have to touch your bag once it leaves from your home, and only collect it once you get to your final destination. Security checks could be completely automated without any physical tapping or frisking. Of course, there's a big investment and will required from the security staff in most countries for that to happen, but I think it will eventually happen. And then, of course, eventually you will realize that by the time you get to the gate, the entire journey from home to the gate is not going to take too much time, and you're not going to have too much touch points or interfaces with people at the airport. And that's going to be the new airport or airline digital journey of the future. Next slide, please. So I'll just conclude by giving you a few examples of what airports are already doing, and some of this in collaboration with airlines. Visionbox, as you know, is one of the big technology companies, which is also present in India today. They're trying to move completely to a contactless infrastructure platform to allow both screening of passengers, including for health checkups and boarding processes. Changi already has experimented and implemented contactless immigration clearance processes. Many of you who have gone through Changi Airport must have experienced this yourself. And COVID has triggered some new technologies as well. There's a company called AMOF, which now has infection detection systems, which is not just about thermal scanning, but apparently can also detect other forms of abnormalities. It's a bit scary about what all you can do with technology remotely, but that's something you have to get used to because many of these are being done in the interest of passengers. And Etihad again has been testing contactless medical screening technology. Some of this is already in operation in Abu Dhabi airport, I'm told. So that's something that some of you would experience when you start traveling soon. Next slide, please. Again, as I mentioned earlier, airlines are also thinking quite differently from the past. Air Canada, for example, has reconfigured its A319 fleet to have a full business class configuration. Now, I think this is a product that will work well in developed markets with a high propensity to travel and spend. Don't know really if this is a product for India, being a predominantly low-cost market, but you never know. Because the future can create its own clientele, especially for those who are conscious of safety while traveling. So that's happening. On the right, I've given you an example of the RFID electronic bag tags, which Lufthansa has already introduced. There are other carriers who want to do this as well. Could be the new norm for the future. Is not very expensive to implement and fits well within the whole technology platform that airports and airlines already have. Next slide, please. These are things which have already happened in many airports. Again, there's a bit of repetition. My apologies for that. Next slide, please. Yeah, and we're also going to see increasing use of other new technologies like AR, augmented reality, blockchain, beacons at airports, which are now going to provide a lot of information about passenger movements, and also going to be used as intelligence to understand purchase behavior. Ben mentioned about the closed box on commercial data which airlines hold. I think that's going to change with blockchain. You could have, I think, future commercial arrangements between airlines, airports, and external vendors, where they could agree to share data and commercial intelligence about travelers to see how best each of these parties can monetize them and make it better for their own businesses. And that is something that you would expect to see in the future. And blockchain is still, in a sense, under leveraged or not fully tested in many environments, but it is the future along with IoT and also gamification in some form, which will come at many of these airports. And you will see this happen over the next 5 to 6 years in any large airport that you pass through globally. Next slide, please. Let me stop there. I think I may have probably taken a couple of minutes more, but I just want to leave you with one concluding statement that for me, I think two things are very clear. One is that as people, we all have an inherent desire or desire to travel, and our innate propensity to be mobile will force us to travel in the future as well, irrespective of what crisis hits us. The second part is that while we continue to travel, the other element which will also influence choice is the fact that we want to have social engagement. I think all of us have experienced that. We've all been locked up in homes for quite too long. And if you ask an honest question to any of the attendees on this webinar or the panelists, the quick answer you will get is that yes, we do want a reasonable amount of social engagement, and that's only possible if you get out of your home and travel a lot. So I think the future is bright. It is going to be defined by technology clearly, and it is also going to be determined by our increasing propensity for travel in search of social engagement. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vasudevan. In fact, you touched upon so many things about future technologies. You talked about the policy side of it, what is being done and what more requires to be done. There's a lot of expectation while everybody knows that it saves a lot of time, but business has to survive. And hence, in this entire webinar, we have seen that how the global airlines, the Indian airlines, the Indian airports, and the overall health in context of COVID-19, and what is the support mechanism and what more is required. And we had a peek into the future. Thank you very much, all the three esteemed speakers. So we just have touched the 1.5 hour window. My apologies, we'll take 10 more minutes at least to take a few questions. That's important, that's a responsibility that we have. But just before some people leave out, I have to say a lot of thanks to the speakers and my entire IT team and the communications team here, which helped us in bringing this entire event to the forefront. So the question, I'll take a few, there are too many of them actually from the Facebook, LinkedIn, and the chat box here. Question to Dr. Wooter. Will the current geopolitical tensions hurt global aviation?
That's a good question. I try to answer it very shortly, then we have enough time for other questions. Of course, yes, it will always hurt somewhat. I think that the GDP decrease over the next year will probably hurt the global aviation a bit more. And the second thing, normally if you have geopolitical tensions, you immediately see an impact on international trade. And international trade has an impact on the freight, on the cargo. Cargo represents about 15%, 15% of the revenues of airlines. So it will impact, but I'm not too negative about that. So it will impact, yes, but not too much.
All right, thank you. Question to Ben. In the recent past, due to change in the revenue model of airports, non-aeronautical revenue remained higher than revenue from core aeronautical activities. Do you see this change post-COVID-19? A quick answer to that.
Then definitely there is a change and there is a transformation. That's why we're working on a digital downtown, digital terminal, digital marketplace that the citizens and the travelers will have access to.
Question for Dr. Vasudevan. What should the government do to revive concessionaires of airports? Does the government have such deep pockets?
Good question. So I think we must understand that whatever relief is being to one stakeholder in an extended value chain is going to hurt somebody else. So you're very right. The government obviously in India has to struggle to create a business case first to provide relief to privately managed businesses in general as a philosophy. And I think Professor Bhutto referred to that as well. But we do have this irony somehow that globally we are seeing support being skewed towards government carriers and flag carriers on the airline side, and government-run airports as well, which invariably get budgetary support of some form. But having said that, I think what the government has already done is quite useful. The revenue share is a big risk, or rather obligation of large private operators in India. They have provided immediate relief, but I did mention that that may not be enough. They probably need to extend the deferment or the waiver, if it's possible, for a longer period of time to give them that comfort. Other than that, I think it's also important, as I said, for the regulator to come in and provide some relief. When I say that, I mean the economic regulator, which is the Airports Economic Regulatory Authority of India. They need to relook at some of their guidelines to see if some more relief can be provided for airports to extend concessions to other parts of the value chain, whether it's airlines, ground handlers, concessionaires who provide services at the airport, including fuel farms, and ground handling companies, and also the commercial service providers at airports, who also, in a sense, have to meet their contract obligations on revenue shares and lease charges. So I think if the regulator can come in, along with MOCA, and clearly state what is the window of relief available, how is some of that going to be recovered over a period of time, and what is the credit guarantee or the security that the government can provide to give comfort for these incentives to be extended, I think that will provide extensive relief to most of these stakeholders.
All right. Thanks. Question to Ben. It's a very popular question. I'm sure Ben would have fielded this question umpteen number of times. Does Adani Group eye the struggling Air India as an opportunity?
Well, pre-COVID, there was definitely an interest of the opportunity for us. Post-COVID, since 12 more airports are going to be privatized, we're going to focus on that opportunity first.
In fact, the related question is, should Air India be saved?
Can I just add something?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. If you look, we did some research, and there's quite a lot of research of who earns money in the value chain. And then you can see clearly that the winners in air transport are always airports. So if you want to earn money, don't invest in airlines, invest in airports, especially in a growing market. So just a small comment.
All right. So a quick question to all three of you. A common question is, do we see the need of a globally recognized third party which certifies airports and airlines on different yardsticks, including, customer friendliness, pandemic readiness, climate friendliness, and business friendliness? Is there a space for a third party certification agency?
So in my opinion, there is definitely room for a third party to gather all best practices today and all new innovation of the future and share it with the industry. Again, collaboratively, we have to move the industry forward to 22nd century. And of course, there would be measures and there would be assessment and evaluation process. But I think sharing the best practices would be the number one initiative that we must do.
All right, Dr. You are not audible, Dr. Vasudevan. You to switch on your.
My apologies. I just went on mute.
Yes,
So
yes, please.
quick answer
Yes,
to
please.
that is yes. In fact, it's happening in some form already on climate change and the fact that airports are doing enough to be energy efficient. There are third-party agencies which certify them, and there are enough airports who've made an investment to brand themselves as green airports. Cochin Airport is one. Bangalore Airport is getting there soon. Delhi and Bombay have pursued initiatives as well. The other big change I would expect to see over the next 6 to 12 months is what ACI, IATA, and ICAO together are doing as the global regulatory bodies. I think the new set of standards that they will come out with to address specifically the concern you raised, Professor Kamal, on how do you deal with future threats, biological threats, how do you ensure common standards for passengers across airports, irrespective of where they travel, and how do you deal with the whole threat of cybersecurity as you move to an increasingly digitized world? That standard, I think, will set a new norm for both investments as well as compliance across airports.
All right. Any concluding remarks, Dr. Wooter, on this third-party certification? What's happening in Europe?
Really, just don't invent anything new. There's so many standards available. ISO 14001. You have the beam and so on. So I fully agree with my colleague. Just get on with that, and that will really be a great step forward.
All right, gentlemen. This was a great session. One of the very productive and very informative, and a fantastic flow of information from starting point of airport, airlines, global, India, airports, future business sustainability, policies, technologies. We touched upon it. We did our best. In fact, you guys did your best. I was just a catalyst over there. Thank you very much to all the participants. Thank you very much, my team. And once again, thank you very much, gentlemen. I will look forward to have you again on any such further events. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Kamal, and thanks to the participants. Good day. Stay safe. Bye.
Yes, Ben.
Pleasure. It was a great webinar. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Belgium.
Thank you very much. All right. Bye. भाई साहब थैंक यू तो मुझे खाली आपको बोलना चाहिए थैंक यू तो मुझे खाली आपको